I remember when Hasbro and Marvel got together to recreate Jim Lee's X-Men #1 out of Marvel Legends, and I knew I wanted to do the same and make my own display. Now, for the best-selling comic book of all time in 1991, this X-Men comic sold 8.2 million copies, which is pretty impressive. So I'm sure everyone has had this and has some version or cover of this comic. I, in particular, had the one with Gambit, Colossus, Psylocke, and Rogue. So this comic was always in my collection and always really important to me. So I wanted to build this whole thing out exactly the way it is, and I have all the figures to do it, which is great. And then I want to do something a little different, so we're going to do that. But it's going to be pretty big, so let's get to it. Alright, so the first thing we're going to do is take all of our scraps. Now, I haven't paid for foam in almost a year because I've been trying to get through all of these little pieces of foam that I have because I don't want to waste it. And this is a great project to just take all those scraps, and we're making mountainsides, so I'm definitely going to take all those other pieces eventually and just turn everything into mountains instead of throwing it in the garbage. But I have this big base piece, and I've been using this to kind of block light out of a window in my toy room, but for now, it's going to be going towards this project. And I had all the things stacked up before the hurricane, and then I had to put everything away, so I'm going to have to reconfigure this, and then we can start carving into a mountain. So this is going to be a pretty big diorama. I'm basically using the whole length of this board that I haven't cut all the way, and I'm making 2 base pieces and then 2 backdrop pieces. So I think that should be enough. I'm going to use this length where it's cut uneven as the base piece, and I'm going to cut this other piece in half, and that'll act as my backdrop. So I have these 2 cut even. As you can see, it is the length of my table, and that's good. That's about as long as I want it. We're looking at about 2 feet each side, so I think in total this is going to be a 4 feet project. But it's going to be split in half, so that if you wanted to do this and you wanted to just kind of break it up and only have one side, you can use that other half for something else. So now we're going to start stacking the foam again, and I'm going to make sure I'm trying to stack the bigger pieces at the bottom, and they are all shapes and sizes. These are all from different cuts, and as soon as I get to the top, then we can put some figures on, and it looks pretty good. Now this is all the figures on one side, so they all fit. They somehow are all in the same pose as they are in the comic book cover. So what are we going to do with that other side? You'll see later. But right now I have everything where I want it. I know that the figures are going to fit, and I can kind of position them in the same exact position that they are on the comic book cover. So no big deal. Everything seems to go according to plan right now. So you can see I've made some rock formations, not just for the mountain, but also for the ground. And that's because on the comic book cover, you have Professor X, he's kind of hovering higher, Beast is leaning on a rock, Magneto's up on a pedestal, and Cyclops has his foot on something. So I made a few extra rocks, and I don't think I'm going to glue or magnetize anything, because I want this to be completely modular. Whenever you want, just take everything off, put it wherever, and then you can kind of customize. One thing that I really wanted to work on was an area for Bobby, and we're going to do a ski sled, and this is going to be super easy. And the other thing is putting the X-Men letters onto the side of the mountain, just like it is on the comic book cover. So I'm going to work on that. Not quite sure what I'm going to do there, but when it comes to the ski sled, I think that should be easier. So I have an idea for that. First thing I'm going to do is I need to start gluing all these pieces for the mountain. So I want this to be one big piece, and then we'll kind of connect it all together at the end. But I'm just going to take some Mod Podge. I had some Elmer's glue, but I don't think I have enough, but it's the same thing. So I'm just going to start painting each piece with some Mod Podge, and then we'll start stacking them. So I'm going to repeat this process over and over again until I have all my pieces complete and glued and connected. So after I apply the glue, then I am using hot glue so that it does stick a little faster while that other glue sets in. So now I'm going to be cutting out the letters, and this is actually a tip from someone who watches the channel. They suggested that when cutting letters out of my wire cutter, to use a stencil that is made of like a harder material. So I use cardstock. And I'm gluing the letters to a piece of foam, and then when that dries, I'll go ahead and cut it with the Proxon. So I've already based everything in black except for the mountains, so we still have to carve these, but the glue has held up pretty well. So now we have one big solid piece. And I'm going to take my hand hot wire tool and we're going to start cutting. But safety first, got my mask. So now I'm just going to start cutting this thing, and I'm mostly doing it pretty random, but I am trying to go at the same angle most of the time. So I'll continue cutting that. My glue is dried on the letters, and this actually works pretty well, so I'm definitely going to try this out if I need to do it again. So just keep the temperature setting low. I did get some kind of burning a little bit, but just because it was too high. But putting the stencil on out of cardstock worked really well, and then it peels right off. So that worked pretty good. So I finished all my cutting. You can see there's some randomness, there's some cuts in different places, but I tried to keep it as organic as possible. And this is based off an illustration, so I didn't feel like there was too many rules that I needed to follow. I'm going to start taking this spackle and start kind of getting in the grooves of any of these big open spaces. And for that top section, I left it flat because that's where the lettering is going to go. And I'm just going to gob a big hefty chunk of spackle there because I'm going to stick the letters right in there. So in the meantime, you don't want any of these big gaps. It'll help seal it a little bit before we actually prime it. So just another extra layer of protection to kind of hold this thing in place. So once we're done with that, then I'm going to start taking my letters and squeezing them in. So I kind of use that spackle as mortar, and I'm putting all those letters in, and it sticks pretty well. I'm gonna let that dry, and as soon as that's done drying, then we're gonna be able to start priming this, and that'll give this whole mountain structure that one last final layer of protection. And it's gonna be Mod Podge and black paint, so I think between the glue, the spackle, and the prime, this thing will be fine. So still have some rocks to cut, and I'm just going to make sure that before we prime anything, I have all my cutting done. So I'm just trying to get all of these kind of random rocks, boulders, whatever you have, just kind of cut before I do that. This way I don't have to double up on work. So that spackle's drying. I'll probably be finished cutting all of these rocks in a little bit, and then I want to give them sort of an extra layer of detail. So I did put magnets into the side of the mountain because that is also where I'm going to be putting the ski sled. So I magnetized this part. It's probably the only part I did magnetize. And then I get the magnets in, and I'm going to take this giant piece of foam and just start kind of cutting it. Now it's not going to be exact like the comic cover because I don't want it to be that long, and if it's that long and thin, I don't want it to break. So it's just going to be a small little effect, but again, just taking this random piece of foam, I'm just going to cut the holes out, magnetize it, and then once that's all done, then we can start carving it to look like something like Bobby's ice sled. And I'm just going to use my hot wire tool for this. No big deal, it's going to be super easy. And then once that's done, it'll just magnetize right onto that platform. It'll hide Bobby's feet a little bit, so I think it'll give the effect that we're looking for. So I have the basic shape, and that's pretty much just how it's going to connect here. So I'll just keep cutting this with the hot wire tool, and then we can start painting it, giving it some of those kind of blue and pearlescent white effects to make it look like ice. So pretty easy to do. I know there's other ways you can do this. You can do this with hot glue if you wanted to, but I've seen it many different ways. For the sake of space and time, we're doing this kind of the easy way, but it'll still give the same effect that we're looking for, which is great. And once I have this the way I want it, I'm just going to test it out by putting Iceman on top. So Bobby, he stands on there pretty well. He's high enough where he won't impact any other figures, and you still get the effect of the ice sled, so that's all good. Now we're going to start priming the backdrop, and I'm using white because I'm going to be painting this a bright color, and if you paint it black, you're just going to be doing a million different coats. So also going to prime the ice sled. This will do in white and some metallic paints, so we'll start working on that. And we'll prime our mountains. So between the glue, the spackle, the prime, really getting in all those cracks, it should help seal this thing. I won't worry about any of these pieces ever coming off. It'll just look like one continuous piece of foam, which is great. And we're going to start texturing our base pieces as well as our rocks. And once this is done, then we can start go ahead and cutting in some cracks because we want to give this some extra layer of texture. And pretty much after that, then I'm good with the base and we can start priming everything. So I'll go ahead and put some more of these cracks in, and then we'll get everything primed. And one more thing before we actually prime, I've been doing this the last couple of projects as a test, pretty much to get it ready for this project, is once I'm done texturing everything, I take my spackle and I just kind of spread it out really thin throughout the whole foam piece because I feel like it gives that bottom a really nice stone texture, but it also does something else. If you do a diorama and you're just using acrylic paints, no matter what you do to it, the humidity, the rise in temperature, or the low in temperature is going to make that sticky. So I find putting the spackle there really helps it. Now that my mountains have dried, we're just going to dry brush these. I'm not caking paint on, so first I'm going to dry brush with some gray. I'm going to do this all over the project, and then as we go further and we finish doing one color, I'm going to go lighter in color each time. So the first time I use the light gray, next time I'm going to use white, and then I will mix in some other colors, some greens, some browns, and we'll go ahead and just make sure that we give this thing full coverage. So even doing the bottom, everything's going to look very cohesive from the mountains to the boulders. And you can see that dry brush goes a long way. Really easy to do and really makes this area pop. If I didn't have the X-Men on there, this mountain could probably be used for some sort of tabletop gaming if I knew how to play. And I am leaving the letters dry or just black because I'm going to paint those a specific color in the end. So right now I'm just focusing on the mountains. So anything that you could see from the front, I'll pretty much paint, and really just mixing in those different dry brush colors. So here's where I'll mix in some brown, just kind of give it that dirty feel so it doesn't look like this clean piece of stone. And just kind of mix that in. I think that really gives it more of that organic feel, which is pretty good. I did go ahead and dry brush the ice sled a metallic blue, and I thought I covered up the white too much, so now I'm just going to give it another dry brush of white just to give it a little added extra layer of texture. And once that's done, it'll magnetize perfectly onto that spot in the back. So this piece came out cooler than I expected, even though it's just a fairly easy piece of foam. But I do like the way it came out, and I like the functionality of the magnets. So now this part is probably the most relaxing part of the project, and I'm not a painter, but I did discover some techniques along the way of diorama building because, you know, I did want to paint some of my own backdrops. And this one's super easy because it's just about blending colors, and as a kid I probably would have just like mashed it all together. But really what you do is you start whatever color you want your outside to be, darker to lighter in this case, and you just kind of dab it in, do one color, and then use your paintbrush in the middle of the darker color and the color after, and you can start blending it in. So I think this matches the comic cover pretty well, where I'm getting the coloring and the shading that I want. So this turned out really cool, and I'm going to do this on both sides. You still haven't really seen what I'm using both sides for, so you'll get to see that once I'm done. But these backdrop pieces for me are going to add that extra layer of vibrancy and color to what otherwise would just be kind of a gray rock diorama. So I really do enjoy these backdrop pieces, and this is why I do like to paint my own backdrops instead of keeping things blank. I think it adds that extra layer. Alright folks, this thing is complete. And after so many years of wanting to do this, I finally sat down, took the time, and actually made it. Now, that promo with Hasbro and Marvel, when they used the Marvel Legends, that was my gateway into collecting comic book figures, because at the time, I said I wouldn't collect them. Now I have all the villains, all the heroes, and I finally got to recreate that special comic book cover. So some elements that I really didn't do is I didn't do any of the effects for certain characters, and there's a reason for that. But one, I'm not keeping this, so I'm actually giving this away, and I don't know what the collector that eventually will get this has, but I'll let them work on the effects. So this is actually going away for charity, and as soon as I get more details about that, I will let you know. But I think it's going to go out for auction on Dave Wonder's live stream. So if you do want a chance to win this, then I'll give more details as the time comes. But for now, really, I just want you to see, how you can display these figures in a pretty cool way. And this is not the first comic cover I've done. I actually done the Crucifixion of Wolverine, which I really love that diorama. Super simple, super small. Doesn't take up a lot of space, but this thing is massive. So whoever gets this is going to have to create some room, but it does hold a lot of figures. So I never actually counted, but there's 12 figures on the comic book cover. Not including Magneto. There's 12 heroes plus Magneto, so I guess 13. But in the back, I guess Professor X, Archangel, and Jean Grey, Storm, they kind of get lost there unless you had their specific cover. But if you had that big fold out, it's a little harder to see them. So kind of cool to give them their own space to shine. And then I think where the most action is, I got Beast. Wanted to have him in that pose of him leaning on that rock, so I think he looks great. And then I wish there was a way to have these characters fly without these flight stands. They're a little clunky, but I'll figure that out. So now that I got all the figures on one side, this is really what I wanted to show you, is that I built the other side specifically to squeeze some of those villains on there, and I wanted to make it even. So I used half the side for the heroes, and then moving over to the other side, I fit 12 different villains onto that right side, which is hard because a lot of those X-Men villains are big. They're huge, so I had to get creative in where I put them. But Toad on top, Pyro, and Avalanche, I can have them on the mountainside, and then some of those bigger characters are on the other side. I think I was more inspired for this, not so much by the comic, but by the X-Men animated series intro. I always wanted to kind of do a version of that, but a diorama of that would be kind of boring because it's just a plain flat space. So for me, this is kind of a mix of the animated show intro mixed in with a what if the comic cover had a villain side. Alright guys, stay tuned on how this will be auctioned off. I'm not sure, but it won't be living with me, that's for sure. Hopefully you liked this video. If you did, hit like and subscribe. As always, I appreciate that. And until the next episode, we'll catch you next time.